Charles Caldwell was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1831, entering a world defined by harsh realities and unyielding social barriers. From the moment he took his first breath, the rules of the antebellum South sought to determine his place in life, rules written by others and enforced by a system designed to keep him in chains both physically and socially. Yet, even as a young boy, those who knew him sensed that Caldwell's spirit was anything but ordinary. His sharp mind, his unshakable will, and his quiet confidence marked him as someone destined to challenge the limits that others tried to impose. As he grew, Caldwell mastered the demanding craft of blacksmithing, a skill that required both strength and precision. This trade did more than put tools into the hands of others. It gave him a measure of independence rare for someone in his position. The heat of the forge and the rhythm of hammer against iron became not just his work, but his metaphor. Like the metal he shaped, Caldwell's character was forged in fire, strong, resilient, and unbreakable, in the shadows of a society built on injustice. He was quietly building the skills and reputation that would one day make him a leader. The years of the Civil War brought unimaginable change to the United States. When the conflict ended and the nation entered the uncertain era of Reconstruction, Caldwell seized the moment. He stepped into public life not merely as a survivor of oppression, but as a visionary determined to create a more just society. He believed that freedom meant more than the absence of chains. It meant education, representation, and the right to shape one's own future. His voice carried hope for thousands who had endured centuries of silence. But the very ideals that inspired him also stirred deep fear in those who resisted change. Caldwell's rising influence challenged the old order, and for many who clung to the past, he became a living symbol of transformation they refused to accept. His story is not just one man's journey, it is the story of a nation wrestling with its conscience. A portrait of courage standing against hostility. In this video, we will explore how Charles Caldwell transformed from an enslaved child into a respected blacksmith, a political leader, and ultimately a figure whose unwavering commitment to justice left an indelible mark on American history. His life reminds us that progress is never easy, and that the fight for equality demands both courage and sacrifice. If you find this story inspiring, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends who love history, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories like this to light, stories of resilience, leadership, and the enduring human spirit. Tap the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into the remarkable lives that shaped our world. In the heart of Mississippi, where the humid air carried both the scent of magnolia and the weight of a society built on human bondage, Charles Caldwell discovered a gift that would quietly change the course of his life. From the moment he first watched the dance of firelight in a blacksmith's forge, he was drawn to the artistry and discipline it demanded. While others saw only the endless toil of enslavement, Caldwell saw in the forge something more, a place where raw iron yielded to heat and hammer, a place where skill could transform the unyielding into the useful. His early days were marked by long hours and relentless labor, yet with each strike of the hammer, he was shaping not only metal but also the character and determination that would define him. As his hands grew strong and his technique precise, people in the surrounding community began to take notice. Planters, tradesmen, and neighbors, whether they wished to admit it or not, recognized that Caldwell's talent was rare, his workmanship exceptional, and his reputation as a blacksmith soon traveled beyond the boundaries of the plantation. In Clinton, a small but bustling town, the blacksmith shop was more than a workplace, it was a gathering place, a hub where tools for farms were mended, wagon wheels were reinforced, and whispers of local happenings passed from one visitor to the next. Caldwell stood at the center of this quiet commerce, a figure of focus and skill, his hammer ringing out a rhythm that marked both the passage of time and the steady beat of his own ambition. The sparks that leapt from the anvil were like small defiant stars against the dark backdrop of his era. And though he remained legally bound by the laws of enslavement, the respect he earned through his craft began to grant him something rare, a degree of autonomy that few in his position could even imagine. Customers who relied on his unmatched ability to shape iron could not help but treat him with a certain regard. They needed him, and in needing him, they gave him a space to stand taller, to speak with quiet confidence, and to hold a presence that went beyond the label society tried to force upon him. This reputation gave him more than just personal pride. It offered him a kind of influence, subtle yet unmistakable. Caldwell's forge became not only the place where wagons were repaired and tools were sharpened, but also a space where people came to listen, to share news, and to catch a glimpse of a man whose very existence challenged the rigid boundaries of his time. He had no formal title, no legal standing beyond that of an enslaved man, but within the ring of his anvil secco, he commanded an authority that no law could bestow or deny. Children watched with wide eyes as he bent iron to his will, and elders spoke of his reliability and fairness. Even those who would never have admitted admiration for a black man could not fully ignore the quiet power that radiated from his work. It was in this setting, surrounded by the hiss of the bellows and the deep orange glow of heated metal, that Caldwell began to imagine a life beyond the narrow confines imposed upon him. Every piece of iron he shaped, every tool he perfected, was an act of discipline and vision, a subtle rehearsal for the leadership he would one day embrace. The forge demanded patience and precision. It required foresight and the ability to see what something could become before it took form. These very qualities honed through years of relentless practice would later guide him when the world beyond the forge shifted, when the country tore itself apart in civil war and the promise of freedom emerged from the smoke of battle. By the time the war ended and the nation stumbled into the uncertain years of Reconstruction, Caldwell was no longer simply a blacksmith known for his skill. He was a man whose character had been tempered like the iron he had long mastered. His years at the forge had given him more than a livelihood. They had forged a resilience and a quiet authority that would carry him into the turbulent arena of politics and leadership. The respect he had earned in Clinton, first for his craft and later for his wisdom, became the foundation upon which he would stand when he stepped forward to help shape the future of his community. His blacksmith shop, once a place where iron bent beneath his hammer, had become the training ground for the battles of ideas and rights that lay ahead. And the man who once worked silently among the sparks was now ready to ignite a flame of change that no hammer could extinguish. When the final echoes of the Civil War faded and the smoke of battle lifted, the South stood on uncertain ground, its old order shattered and its future uncharted. For Charles Caldwell, the years of war had not only transformed the nation, but also revealed the strength that had long been building inside him. The quiet discipline of the forge had trained his mind and his spirit, teaching him to shape something lasting from raw and unyielding material. Now, as Mississippi entered the unsteady era of Reconstruction, the skills that had once bent iron to his will prepared him for a greater challenge, helping to reshape the very fabric of society. The end of slavery had opened doors that only years earlier had seemed unimaginable. And Caldwell, who had earned the respect of neighbors through his craft and character, now stepped onto a broader stage where his voice could influence the destiny of thousands. The state he called home was in turmoil. Plantations lay in ruin, former enslavers mourned the loss of their power, and newly freed men and women sought the rights that freedom promised but did not guarantee. Into this volatile landscape came the call for a new constitutional convention in Mississippi in 1868, a gathering to decide how the state would be governed in the wake of emancipation. Caldwell's reputation as a man of integrity and resolve had spread far beyond the steady ring of his anvil. Those who had seen him work knew his steady hand and measured judgment. Those who had heard him speak recognized a mind as sharp as any blade he had forged. He had become more than a craftsman, he was a natural leader whose life embodied the possibilities of freedom, His neighbors, black and white, understood that in him lay both the courage to challenge injustice and the wisdom to build something enduring. When the time came to select delegates, the choice seemed almost inevitable. Charles Caldwell was elected as one of 16 black men to sit among the architects of a new Mississippi. For Caldwell, the convention was not merely a political event. It was the realization of a vision he had carried quietly through years of oppression. The same patience that once guided his hammer now guided his words, and the precision with which he had shaped iron now shaped his arguments. He spoke for those whose voices had too often been silenced, insisting that freedom meant more than the absence of chains. He called for public education so that the children of both races could learn and grow together, for equal rights under the law so that liberty would not be an empty promise, and for the ballot to be placed firmly in the hands of black men who had so recently been denied even the most basic recognition of citizenship. These were bold demands in a state where many still clung to the past. And yet Caldwell's quiet strength gave them weight. He was not a man of reckless rhetoric. He was a man whose very life told the story of resilience and possibility. And those who listened could not ignore the truth he represented. The convention itself was a place of tension and hope. Old loyalties and new realities collided in debate, and the air was thick with both fear and expectation. Caldwell moved through these sessions with the same steady resolve that had long defined him, unshaken by those who doubted the capacity of formerly enslaved people to govern or to claim their rights. He believed that Mississippi could rise from the ashes of war only if it embraced justice and equality, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that the Constitution they crafted would reflect those ideals. It was a task as demanding as any he had faced at the forge, but just as he once transformed stubborn metal into useful form, he now helped to shape the principles that would guide a fragile democracy. When the convention concluded, Caldwell emerged not just as a delegate but as a recognized Republican leader, a figure whose influence extended across the state. He had stepped from the glow of the blacksmith's fire into the full light of public life, carrying with him the same quiet confidence and unyielding purpose that had marked his every endeavor. His presence in the political arena was itself a challenge to the old order, a living testament to the power of perseverance and the reality that courage and character could open paths once thought impossible. The boy born into bondage had become a man who shaped the laws of his state, proving that freedom was not simply given but forged like iron through skill, patience, and the unshakable belief that a better future could be made by human hands. In the charged atmosphere of Mississippi's Reconstruction politics, Charles Caldwell carried with him the lessons of the forge and the discipline of a lifetime spent turning stubborn material into something strong and useful. When he took his seat among the delegates of the Constitutional Convention, he understood that the task before them required not only intellect and strategy, but also the kind of patience he had mastered long ago, when the glow of heated iron guided his every movement. The war had ended, but the struggle to define freedom had only begun, and Caldwell recognized that liberty without power meant little. For him, the work of true emancipation demanded more than the removal of chains. It required the creation of structures that would protect the rights of those who had been denied them for generations. With this conviction, he became a passionate advocate for measures that would shape the very foundation of American democracy. He spoke with steady resolve about the need for black men to hold the right to vote, knowing that political voice was the cornerstone of genuine freedom. He had lived the reality of a world where decisions were made entirely without the input of those whose lives were most affected, and he knew that without the ballot, newly freed people would remain vulnerable to the whims of those determined to restore the old hierarchy. His call for black male suffrage was not simply a plea for inclusion. It was an assertion that the nation could not claim to be a democracy while silencing millions of its citizens. Caldwell argued that the right to vote would give men and women in his community the power to protect their families, to influence the laws under which they lived, and to ensure that the hard-won victories of the Civil War were not swept away by a resurgence of the past. His voice carried the weight of lived experience and the clarity of someone who had worked all his life to shape something enduring. But Caldwell's vision reached beyond the ballot box. He believed that freedom would remain fragile if it was not accompanied by education, and he insisted that public schools must be open to all children, regardless of race or background. Having been denied formal schooling himself, he understood the transformative power of knowledge and the danger of ignorance. He imagined a Mississippi where classrooms welcomed every child and where learning would break down the walls of prejudice and poverty. Education, in his, was the forge where the minds of a new generation would be tempered, where young people could acquire the tools to claim their rightful place as citizens and leaders. He knew that without such opportunity, the promise of Reconstruction would wither, leaving future generations no stronger than those who had suffered before them. Caldwell also championed the broader principles of equality and citizenship that would soon be enshrined in the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution. These amendments would guarantee birthright citizenship, equal protection under the law, and the right to vote for black men, securing in national law the ideals he and his fellow delegates fought to protect. For Caldwell, these were not abstract political theories but living necessities. He had felt the weight of a system that treated him as property. He had seen neighbors and friends denied even the most basic recognition of their humanity. Now he sought to help write into law the safeguards that would prevent such injustice from ever again being the foundation of American life. His arguments were sharpened by years of quiet endurance and strengthened by a belief that the country could live up to its own highest ideals. In the convention hall, where debate often turned heated and the air itself seemed charged with the tension of a society in transformation, Caldwell's manner remained calm, his words measured, his purpose unwavering. He knew the stakes were high. Every proposal for equality was met with resistance from those who feared the loss of their former power. Yet his life had taught him that lasting change required perseverance, and he refused to be deterred. He carried himself with the same quiet authority that had once impressed neighbors at the forge, and his fellow delegates recognized that behind his steady gaze lay both moral conviction and the practical wisdom of a man who had overcome obstacles that most could scarcely imagine. The principles Caldwell defended would outlive him, written into the nation's charter and echoed in generations of struggles for civil rights. But in those decisive days of 1868, they were fragile hopes, contested at every turn by voices determined to hold the future hostage to the past. Caldwell's presence in that hall was itself an act of defiance and a symbol of possibility. The boy who had once labored under the weight of enslavement now helped craft the laws of a state and influence the direction of a country. In advocating for black male suffrage, for public education for all, and for the ideals that became the 14th and 15th Amendments, he proved that the fires of adversity could produce more than pain. They could forge leaders capable of reshaping history. His work in those months would resonate far beyond Mississippi, laying a foundation for the ongoing struggle to ensure that the promises of freedom and equality belong to everyone. The years that followed the Constitutional Convention tested Charles Caldwell in ways as fierce as the fires of his forge. For the ideals he had helped to write into law were not merely debated in halls of government, but contested on the dusty streets and shadowed corners of Mississippi. Reconstruction promised a new order, but there were many who could not accept a world in which black men voted, held office, and shaped policy, and their resentment often turned to violence. Caldwell, now recognized as a leading Republican voice, understood that progress came with risk. He moved through a landscape where hope and hostility walked side by side, and he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had once steadied his hammer, aware that the path toward equality would never be without danger. One evening that danger became sudden and real. Tensions in Clinton had been simmering for months, and Caldwell's growing influence had made him a target of bitter opposition. His work for black suffrage and equal education had inspired many but enraged others who clung to the old ways. Among them was the son of a local judge, a young man whose anger toward Caldwell's rising stature had hardened into open confrontation. What began as a heated exchange quickly turned into a violent assault. Witnesses would later describe how the young man, fueled by resentment, launched an attack that left Caldwell with no choice but to defend himself. Years of steady discipline and physical strength, honed at the blacksmith's anvil, now became the tools of survival. In the struggle that followed, the assailant fell, and Caldwell stood shaken but alive, his own life spared only by the reflexes and resilience he had cultivated over a lifetime. In a state still struggling to accept the very idea of black citizenship, the aftermath of the incident might easily have sealed his fate. Mississippi's courts were not known for their fairness toward men like Caldwell, and many expected that the law would be used to punish him, regardless of the truth. The prospect of a trial before an all-white jury seemed to many of his friends like a certain path to conviction. Yet Caldwell, who had long believed in the power of reason and the rule of law, faced the proceedings with the same resolve he had brought to every challenge. He refused to be cowed by fear, standing firm in the belief that his actions had been nothing more than the instinct to preserve life in the face of a deadly threat. As the trial unfolded, the tension in the courtroom mirrored the larger struggle outside its walls. The question was not merely whether Caldwell had acted in self-defense, but whether the ideals of Reconstruction equality before the law and justice for all citizens could withstand the weight of deeply rooted prejudice. Witness after witness recounted the confrontation, describing how the Judge Esson had initiated the attack, and how Caldwell's response had been both measured and necessary. The jury, composed entirely of white men, listened as the evidence was laid before them, their faces revealing little of what they thought. When the verdict was finally read, it carried the force of a quiet revolution. Caldwell was acquitted, the jury acknowledging what the facts made undeniable. He had acted to save his own life. It was the first time in Mississippi's history that an all-white jury had acquitted a black man who had killed a white man, a decision that echoed far beyond the courthouse walls. For those committed to the ideals of Reconstruction, it was a rare and powerful affirmation that justice could, at least for a moment, rise above the old hierarchies. For Caldwell, it was more than personal vindication. It was a sign that the principles he had fought for at the convention, equality under the law, and the right of every citizen to fair treatment, could be made real. The acquittal did not erase the danger that shadowed his life. If anything, it deepened the resentment of those who saw his freedom as an affront to their own sense of power. Caldwell understood this, yet he neither retreated nor allowed fear to dictate his path. He continued to speak, to organize, and to lead, knowing that his survival in court had only strengthened his responsibility to the cause of justice. The blacksmith who once shaped iron to endure heat and pressure had now proven that his own character was no less resilient. His trial became a turning point, a moment when the principles forged in the fires of Reconstruction were tested in the most personal of ways and, against all expectations, held firm. For Caldwell, the experience was both a warning and a vindication. It revealed the fragility of progress and the courage required to sustain it. But it also offered a glimpse of what the nation might become when law and fairness prevailed over hatred and fear. He walked from the courtroom not only as a free man, but as a living testament to the possibility that justice could be more than an aspiration. The victory, hard-won and precarious, affirmed the belief that the ideals he had long championed were not mere words on paper, but forces strong enough to withstand the fiercest opposition. And though he knew that the struggle was far from over, the verdict stood as a rare beacon of hope in a time when hope itself was often the most radical act. By the autumn of 1875, Charles Caldwell had become more than a survivor of violence and a skilled legislator. He had emerged as a visionary leader determined to demonstrate that politics could be a force for community and inclusion rather than a weapon of division and fear. The scars of past confrontations, including the deadly incident with the judge's son, had only strengthened his resolve. He understood that the promise of Reconstruction freedom, equality, and civic participation would not be secured by retreating from the public sphere, nor by allowing fear to dictate action. It was in this spirit that he conceived an event that would test not only the courage of those who attended but the very ideals he had spent a lifetime cultivating. The plan was daring in its simplicity. A peaceful Republican rally in Clinton, a gathering that would embrace both black citizens newly empowered with the vote and white allies. And remarkably, even members of the Democratic Party, the political heirs of the old order that had once sought to subjugate him. Caldwell envisioned a scene of civic engagement that transcended the bitter divisions of the past. The event would be outdoors, open to families, with picnics and conversation fostering a sense of community that extended beyond mere politics. The idea of inviting Democrats to speak was radical, a gesture that sought to prove that dialogue could coexist with disagreement, and that mutual respect could replace the cycles of hostility that had defined the region for generations. His hope was that the principles of democracy, fair discourse, participation, and the peaceful exchange of ideas could be demonstrated in practice, even in a town still steeped in the shadows of slavery and prejudice. By planning the rally carefully, banning weapons and alcohol, and emphasizing civility, Caldwell sought to establish an environment where political engagement could be safe and inclusive, a striking contrast to the chaos and violence that too often accompanied public gatherings in Mississippi. The day arrived, and Clinton's streets, usually quiet under the humid September sun, began to hum with anticipation. Families gathered, bringing food, blankets, and hope. Black citizens, many of whom had never before been allowed such public expression of their voices and rights, came prepared to witness what Caldwell had promised, an example of politics as a space for dialogue rather than intimidation. The air was charged with a mixture of excitement and tension, for everyone present understood that this was more than a rally. It was a statement, a tangible proof that civic participation could flourish even in the face of long-standing hostility. As the speakers took turns addressing the crowd, Caldwell's presence was both symbolic and practical. He was a man who had survived attempts on his life and still stood unbowed, embodying the courage and resilience that the rally sought to inspire. For the first hour, it seemed that Caldwell's vision was being realized. The Democratic speaker, Mose Johnston, addressed the crowd, and his words were met with polite attention, a sign that the norms of civility could, at least temporarily, take hold. Black families listened, children sat wide-eyed, and the rhythm of a community daring to coexist under principles of fairness and dialogue seemed within reach. Caldwell moved among the attendees, checking on arrangements, ensuring that the atmosphere remained safe, and quietly reinforcing the message that political engagement could be an act of courage and cooperation. It was a delicate balance, a demonstration that the promises of Reconstruction were not abstract ideals but actions that could be practiced and witnessed in real life. Yet, as with much of Caldwell's life, the shadow of opposition was never far away. Among the crowd were 18 armed white men, ex-Confederates, and local Democratic supporters whose presence betrayed the fragile nature of peace in Mississippi. Their intentions were clear. Their loyalty to old hierarchies and resentment toward black empowerment made the possibility of violence almost inevitable. Caldwell, aware of the potential threat, had anticipated the need for calm and organization. But even the most careful planning could not guarantee control over the impulses of those determined to resist change. The rally's initial success, its orderly conduct, and the respectful attention given to all speakers was a testament to Caldwell's leadership. Yet it also set the stage for a dramatic confrontation that would reveal both the promise and peril of his vision. The narrative of the September rally is not merely one of triumph or tragedy, but a vivid illustration of the complexities Caldwell faced as a leader. It showcased his commitment to inclusivity, his belief in civic engagement as a transformative force, and his courage in standing firmly for principles that many considered dangerous. The event was a microcosm of the larger struggle unfolding across Mississippi and the South, the battle to translate the ideals of freedom into tangible, lived reality. Caldwell's rally, carefully organized and audacious in its invitation to opponents, reflected a man whose leadership had evolved from the forge of personal skill to the furnace of social and political challenge, embodying the delicate balance between hope, vigilance, and the unyielding pursuit of justice in a world still recovering from the legacy of slavery. The brief moment of hope that dawned over Clinton during Charles Caldwell's meticulously organized Republican rally soon gave way to a nightmare that no one present would ever forget. A violent eruption that starkly revealed the fragility of progress in a society still haunted by the specter of slavery. For the first hour, the gathering had unfolded with cautious optimism. Families picnicked under the late summer sun, speakers addressed the crowd with measured words, and Caldwell moved among them with the quiet authority of a man who had survived more than his share of threats and challenges. Yet lurking among the attendees were 18 armed white men, ex-Confederates loyal to the Democratic Party, whose presence transformed the hopeful scene into a powder keg, their intentions as deadly as their resentment toward a black man daring to lead. These men, later referred to as white liners, had come not for dialogue but for destruction, carrying in their hearts the lingering hatred of a society that could not accept the rise of a people it had once enslaved. As the Republican speakers took the stage, attempting to rally their audience in the spirit of inclusion and civic responsibility, the white liners began their attack. The first shots rang out suddenly, shattering the fragile calm and plunging the rally into chaos. Panic swept through the crowd as bullets tore through the air, and the orderly picnic transformed into a desperate scramble for survival. Families ran in all directions, carrying children, clutching blankets, and seeking any shelter that could provide a momentary reprieve from the hail of gunfire. The horror was immediate and indiscriminate. Men and women who had gathered to exercise their rights and to participate in the democratic process were now targets, forced into flight by an onslaught born of hatred and fear. The violence of the first hour was only the opening act of a wider campaign of terror. In the aftermath of the initial shooting, rumors and lies spread through the white community, claiming that the black attendees had intended to attack Clinton itself. These fabricated fears provided the pretext for what came next, a coordinated assault over the following 2 days, during which the white liners descended upon the town and surrounding areas with a brutality that left no one untouched. Armed and determined, they moved through neighborhoods, entering homes, dragging black citizens from their doors, and shooting them without hesitation. The terror was swift and calculated, an exercise in the projection of power designed to erase any assertion of black autonomy. The dead numbered between 35 and 50, many of them ordinary men, women, and even children whose only crime was being present, being seen, or being related to those who dared to step into public life. The looting that accompanied the bloodshed added a further layer of cruelty. Houses left temporarily empty and the panic were ransacked, possessions taken, and livelihoods disrupted. The white liners sought not only to instill fear, but to deprive the victims of the material foundations necessary for survival. A stark demonstration of how deeply intertwined racial violence and economic oppression were in the post-war South. Survivors recounted the scene in letters and memoirs, describing streets littered with the remnants of shattered doors, broken windows, and abandoned belongings, all under the oppressive weight of fear that seemed to hang over every block. The psychological toll of these attacks was immeasurable, embedding a lasting sense of vulnerability in the hearts of those who had once dared to imagine a life free from terror. Amid this carnage, Charles Caldwell's role as a leader became even more critical. Rather than retreating in the face of overwhelming danger, he mobilized what forces and support he could to protect his community, organizing a militia that moved cautiously through Clinton to defend those who remained. His experience in navigating both literal and metaphorical fires honed from years at the forge and tested through political battles was now applied to the very real task of safeguarding lives. Yet even this act of courage could not entirely shield the community from the broader campaign of intimidation, as the Whiteliners' objective extended beyond immediate violence to the suppression of political power itself. Every act of resistance by black citizens was met with heightened retaliation, a chilling reinforcement that their struggle was far from over and that the stakes of participation in public life remained extraordinarily high. The September massacre in Clinton marked a turning point in the history of Reconstruction, a stark reminder of both the possibilities and the perils of black political engagement in the post-Civil War South. While the rally had initially symbolized hope, courage, and the potential for civic collaboration, the subsequent violence exposed the depth of entrenched resistance and the lengths to which those threatened by equality would go to preserve a racial hierarchy. For Caldwell and his followers, the events were a lesson in vigilance, resilience, and the unflinching pursuit of justice even when confronted with the most extreme hostility. The story of those 2 days in Clinton endures as a testament to the bravery of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, and to the leadership of a man whose life and vision could inspire both admiration and fear, depending on the eyes that beheld him. In recounting these events, one cannot ignore the broader implications. The massacre was not merely an isolated incident of local violence, but a reflection of systemic opposition to black empowerment and democratic participation throughout the South. It illustrated the fragility of progress in a society still grappling with the legacies of slavery and the resistance to change that threatened to undo every gain achieved during Reconstruction. Yet it also underscored the courage required to stand firm in the face of terror, and the enduring impact of leadership that combines principle, foresight, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Charles Caldwell's response to the massacre, his organization of defense, and his determination to maintain dignity and agency for his community became emblematic of a struggle that would continue long after the streets of Clinton had been emptied and the immediate violence had subsided, reminding generations to come that even in the darkest hours, the pursuit of justice demands both courage and conviction. In the chaotic aftermath of the September massacre, the fragile hopes of Reconstruction in Mississippi faced a devastating test, one that would underscore the limitations of federal power and the relentless determination of white supremacists to reclaim control. Charles Caldwell, who had spent his life defying expectations and carving out space for black leadership, now confronted a new form of adversity, the abandonment of protective oversight from the highest levels of government. Despite urgent pleas from Mississippi's Republican Governor Adelbert Ames, who had witnessed the bloodshed and understood the scale of the threat to black citizens, President Ulysses Grant's response was restrained and disappointing, reflecting a growing national awareness with the recurring outbreaks of violence in the South. Grant's administration, though supportive of Reconstruction in principle, hesitate to commit significant federal forces, leaving communities like Clinton exposed to the full force of local terror and intimidation. The absence of robust protection sent a clear and chilling signal. While black men had gained the legal right to vote, and political participation had been codified in the amendments to the Constitution, those rights could be effectively nullified when threatened by organized violence and intimidation. Black voters, acutely aware of the deadly consequences of defiance, faced an agonizing choice. The events of September had illustrated that the act of exercising one's rights could invite deadly retaliation. a lesson imprinted with brutal clarity in the memories of survivors. Many chose to stay home on election day, paralyzed by fear for themselves and their families, while others fled the area entirely, seeking refuge in towns where the U.S. Army maintained a stronger presence. The psychological impact of this repression was profound. The thrill of newfound empowerment was overshadowed by the ever-present danger of armed retaliation. Communities that had briefly glimpsed the possibilities of self-determination and civic engagement now confronted the harsh reality that the promises of Reconstruction were contingent upon the willingness of power holders to enforce them, and that such enforcement was often tenuous or absent altogether. Against this backdrop, the Democratic Party, emboldened by the retreat of federal oversight and the intimidation of black voters, swiftly regained control of the state legislature. Their victory was not merely political but symbolic, a reclamation of authority that sent a stark message to those who had dared to imagine a more equitable society. For Caldwell, the consequences were deeply personal. His hard-won seat in the Mississippi State Senate, earned through years of dedication, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice, was lost in the tide of voter suppression and terror. The defeat was a bitter reminder that leadership in the Reconstruction South required not only vision and skill, but the ability to navigate a landscape in which legal rights were constantly challenged by extralegal forces, and where the machinery of intimidation could nullify the very processes of democracy. Yet Caldwell's response to this setback was emblematic of his character and lifelong commitment to his community. He did not abandon Clinton or retreat into obscurity. Though stripped of official political authority, he remained a stalwart protector of his neighbors, continuing to organize and advocate within the confines of a society that sought to erase him from public life. The resilience he displayed in these months reflected a profound understanding that the struggle for justice was not contingent upon holding office, but upon sustaining the principles for which he had fought. His actions became a model of civic courage, demonstrating that leadership could manifest in the defense of community and dignity even when formal power structures failed to provide support. The consequences of the election and the lack of federal intervention were far-reaching, marking a turning point in Mississippi's Reconstruction history. The rollback of black political power in the state signaled the beginning of a broader retrenchment across the South, where similar tactics of violence, intimidation, and legal manipulation would be employed to disenfranchise black citizens and restore white dominance. For historians, these events illustrate the fragile nature of political progress in the face of entrenched social hierarchies and the vital role of both federal enforcement and local courage in sustaining newly won rights. Caldwell's loss of his Senate seat, while a personal defeat, served as a stark reminder that the fight for equality was ongoing, requiring vigilance, solidarity, and an unwavering commitment to principle even in the absence of immediate success. Amid the disappointment, Caldwell's continued presence in Clinton offered a powerful counter-narrative to the forces arrayed against him. He embodied a refusal to yield to intimidation, a steadfast commitment to the welfare of his community, and an enduring belief that the struggle for justice transcended electoral victories. By remaining engaged and protective, he demonstrated that leadership was not defined solely by political office but by moral courage and the capacity to inspire and shield others in perilous times. The events surrounding the 1875 election encapsulate both the promise and peril of Reconstruction, highlighting the extraordinary obstacles faced by those who sought to implement its ideals, and the extraordinary fortitude required to persevere when the apparatus of oppression reasserted itself with lethal efficiency. In reflecting on this period, one can see Charles Caldwell's experience as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning that rights without protection can be rendered meaningless, and an inspiration that even in the face of systemic obstruction and personal loss, courage, leadership, and community advocacy remain potent forces. The fall of the Republicans in Mississippi, the intimidation of black voters, and Caldwell's own loss of office underscore the fragile balance between law and power, between ideals and reality. Yet they also reveal the enduring human capacity to resist, to organize, and to act in defense of justice, regardless of the obstacles imposed by fear, violence, or institutional neglect. Through this lens, Caldwell's story becomes more than the narrative of one man's career. It is a testament to resilience, an emblem of unwavering principle, and a powerful example of the costs and necessities of standing for justice in the most perilous of times. Even after surviving countless threats, navigating political battles, and enduring the horrors of the September massacre, Charles Caldwell remained committed to his community and to the principles that had guided his life, a dedication that would ultimately place him in mortal danger. By late December of 1875, the lingering tension in Clinton, Mississippi, had not abated. Caldwell had continued his efforts to protect black citizens, to advise and shield families from harassment, and to ensure that his community could navigate the treacherous social and political landscape without succumbing entirely to fear. His vigilance extended to the most personal of connections. When he learned that his nephew, David Washington, had been threatened and harassed by local white men, Caldwell could not ignore the danger that encroached even upon his own family. The responsibility he felt was not abstract. It was immediate, tangible, and intensely personal. His reputation as a leader, protector, and fearless man of principle meant that stepping into harm's way was not a choice, but an obligation, a continuation of the role he had occupied since emerging from the forge and rising into public office. On December 25th, the day was heavy with both winter chill and historical irony. For the holiday that symbolized peace and family became the stage for the ultimate act of betrayal. Caldwell was lured into the basement of a local saloon, a familiar place in Clinton yet transformed in that moment into a trap. Under the pretense of sharing a Christmas toast with a long-time acquaintance named Buck Cabell. Cabell, like many of the white men in the area, had observed Caldwell's ascent from enslaved blacksmith to state senator with a mixture of fear and resentment. Though they had known each other for years, any semblance of familiarity was a fragile veneer, for Cabell represented a community that had never forgiven or forgotten the challenge Caldwell posed to the established order. The invitation, ostensibly festive, carried the weight of menace, reflecting the lethal intersection of personal grudges and the broader campaign to seize black leadership in the post-Reconstruction South. As Caldwell entered the basement, the scene was deceptively ordinary. The clink of glasses, the faint aroma of spirits, and the superficial cheer of a holiday toast. Yet beneath the surface, hostility simmered, and the moment was pregnant with danger. The first shots rang out suddenly, a violent rupture of normalcy that shattered any pretense of safety. One bullet struck Caldwell in the skull, a wound that might have felled a man of lesser resolve. But Caldwell, forged by years of skill, struggle, and survival, refused to succumb passively. Despite the grievous injury, he retained consciousness, his presence of mind and indomitable spirit unbroken even as blood poured and the threat of death pressed against him from every side. This was a man whose life had been shaped by the harshest realities of slavery and the treacherous politics of Reconstruction. A man who had learned to confront danger with composure and calculation. In the midst of this violent ambush, Caldwell's character shone in a final, unforgettable act of defiance and dignity. He demanded to be carried into the street, away from the shadows of the basement, insisting that he meet death as a man who had lived with honor, courage, and integrity. Standing before his assailants, bloodied yet upright, he spoke words that would echo through history, words that encapsulated both his personal bravery and the ethos he had carried throughout his life. You kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward. The statement was not merely a declaration of personal valor, but a broader testament to the resilience and moral fortitude that had defined Caldwell's journey from enslaved blacksmith to political leader and community protector. In that moment, facing a hail of bullets and the certainty of death, Caldwell transformed his final act into a moral victory, asserting the enduring dignity of a life lived with courage and principle. Even when the forces arrayed against him sought to obliterate not just his body but the example he embodied. The ambush on Christmas Day did not end with Caldwell's death. It extended to his family, underscoring the ruthless lengths to which white supremacists would go to eliminate challenges to their dominance. His younger brother Samuel, uninvolved in politics and unarmed, was hunted down and killed that same night, a stark punishment by association, a demonstration that the campaign against Caldwell's influence was personal as well as political. The attackers desecrated the family home, overturning coffins and spitting upon the bodies in an effort to erase both memory and legacy. This calculated cruelty reflected a mindset in which intimidation and terror were employed as tools to suppress black leadership and to send a chilling message to the wider community. The rise of a black man, no matter how principled or courageous, would not be tolerated. Caldwell's death on that winter day marked the violent culmination of his struggle against entrenched racial oppression and the systemic resistance to black political power in Mississippi. Yet even in death, his actions and words carried forward a legacy that could not be extinguished by bullets or intimidation. He had lived as a man who forged not only iron in the blacksmith shop, but the possibilities of justice and leadership in a society determined to deny them. The bravery, moral clarity, and unflinching commitment to community that characterized his final moments serve as a powerful reminder that true leadership is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the courage to act in spite of it, and that the principles one defends with integrity can endure long after the individual has fallen. Caldwell's story, culminating in the ambush on December 25, 1875, is thus both a tragedy and an enduring testament to human resilience, a narrative that continues to inspire reflection on justice, courage, and the cost of standing unwaveringly for what is right. Charles Caldwell's life and death stand as both a monument and a warning, a story that captures the turbulent transition of Mississippi from the fleeting hope of Reconstruction to the harsh reality of Jim Crow. His murder was not merely the end of one man's remarkable journey. It was a symbolic act that signaled the violent suppression of black political power across the South. A deliberate message that the advances of Reconstruction could be undone when met with unrelenting opposition. In the years following Caldwell's assassination, the South systematically rolled back the gains that black citizens had fought so hard to secure. Voting rights were curtailed, political participation was curtailed, and the terror tactics employed against black communities became increasingly codified through discriminatory laws and social practices that would endure for decades. Yet even as these forces sought to erase the progress of men like Caldwell, the courage he displayed through struggle, leadership, and ultimately, his defiant final stand remained an enduring beacon of resilience, a testament to the human spirit in the face of oppression. To understand the full significance of Caldwell's legacy, it is essential to recognize not only the brutal context in which he lived and died but also the extraordinary achievements that preceded it. Born into the most inhumane conditions of antebellum Mississippi, Caldwell defied the odds through skill, intellect, and sheer determination, mastering the craft of blacksmithing to earn respect within his community while still enslaved. His rise from the forge to the halls of the Mississippi State Senate embodied a profound transformation, not only in his personal trajectory but in the social and political possibilities for black Americans in the Reconstruction era. He leveraged his unique skills, knowledge of the social system, and political acumen to advocate tirelessly for equality, suffrage, and public education, embodying the promise of a society where justice and opportunity were not dictated by skin color. Yet the violent backlash Caldwell faced underscores the fragility of progress in a society structured to preserve racial hierarchy. His assassination was not a random act of cruelty, but a calculated strike against the idea that black men could wield influence, organize communities, and participate fully in the political life of their state. The ambush on Christmas Day, and the simultaneous targeting of his family, exemplified the lengths to which white supremacists would go to enforce their vision of power, and the utter failure of the government to intervene revealed the limits of federal protection, and the vulnerability of those who dared to challenge systemic oppression. Despite these grim realities, Caldwell's defiance, standing upright, facing his killers, and asserting his dignity even in the face of death, created a moral victory that transcended the immediate physical outcome, a victory that would echo through history as a model of courage and integrity. The broader implications of Caldwell's life and death extend beyond Mississippi, illustrating the dynamic tension between justice, power, and resistance in American history. His story is a vivid reminder that the fight for civil rights has always been perilous, and that progress is often met with violent resistance from those invested in maintaining inequality. Yet it is precisely this resistance that amplifies the significance of Caldwell's achievements. His ability to organize, to lead, and to protect his community even in the absence of full legal protections demonstrates the extraordinary resilience required to enact change in the face of systemic oppression. His courage and leadership became a symbol for future generations, a narrative thread connecting the struggles of Reconstruction-era activists to the ongoing civil rights movements that would follow nearly a century later. Even today, the lessons of Charles Caldwell's life resonate. While there may be no grand monument in the Mississippi capital commemorating his service, and while the physical markers of his life may be modest, a small historical plaque at the site of his death, his legacy persists in the principles he championed and the example he set. He embodied the belief that courage, integrity, and moral fortitude can withstand even the most ruthless attempts to silence them, and that leadership is not merely about office or title, but about the capacity to act on principle and inspire others through example. For modern audiences, his story provides both inspiration and reflection. Inspiration in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, and reflection on the social, political, and ethical dimensions of justice, courage, and equality. In recounting Caldwell's life, we are reminded that history is not only shaped by the victors or the oppressors, but also by those who resist with steadfast determination, who stand in defense of their communities and their principles, and who refuse to be silenced, even when the price is life itself. His defiance, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to justice ensure that, though his life was cut short, the ideals he championed endure. His courage provides a template for moral action, a demonstration that true influence is measured not by survival alone, but by the impact one leaves on the community and the inspiration one provides to future generations. As we conclude this story, it is important to reflect on both the tragedy and the triumph of Charles Caldwell's life. He lived at a time when the promise of freedom and equality was met with fierce resistance, and yet he did not allow fear to dictate his actions. He stood for what was right, led with integrity, and faced the ultimate sacrifice with bravery and dignity. His story challenges us to consider the enduring importance of courage, justice, and community in our own lives, and to remember that the actions of one determined individual can echo far beyond the immediate moment, influencing society in profound and lasting ways. Thank you for taking the time to hear Charles Caldwell's story, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of justice. If you were inspired by this narrative, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with others so that more people can learn about the remarkable lives that history often overlooks. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like Caldwell's continue to inspire, educate, and illuminate the enduring struggle for equality. By keeping these histories alive, we honor the bravery of those who came before us and remind ourselves of the ongoing work necessary to build a just and equitable society for all.